Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join our conversation, we'll open up the phones a little bit later because we have lots to talk about today. If you've been looking at the news, you know that there was a massacre in Mali. At least 27 bodies found dead inside a hotel. U.S. Special Forces were able to take out 2 al-Qaeda terrorists. And, of course, all this week we've been talking about ISIS and the bombing that took place and the shootings that took place in Paris. In the meantime, we have, as we posted yesterday, 8 Syrians caught at the Texas border in Laredo, 6 Syrians with fake passports captured in Honduras on the way to the United States, 5 men from Pakistan, 1 from Afghanistan, actually trying to enter Arizona from Mexico, and the list goes on and on and on. So in studio with us today, Penna, Dexter, and Jeremy Dice. Jeremy Dice is the senior
here in the U.S. Whenever something like this happens in the world, especially with one of our allies, and France certainly is that, we have to figure out how does this spread, what other incidents and things can happen. We've already had this tragedy in Mali today, and they did catch this week, as probably most people have read in the news, the mastermind, at least they believe the alleged mastermind of the Paris attacks. I'll try to pronounce the name, Abdelhamid Aboud. He was the ringleader. And one of the interesting parts of this, Kerby, is this hotbed of terror in Brussels, Belgium, called Molenbeek. Mm-hmm. And, they can't even control the terrorism that's coming out of that city, that neighborhood. And yet it's very near the headquarters of the European Union. So I think there's just a lot of geopolitical considerations and repercussions from this, and it's just making us think globally again, and really also strategically, and really pay attention to our security. That's what we need to be doing, although I'm not so sure that our White House is doing that.
I might just mention that yesterday we posted a very good piece by Andrew McCarthy talking about these no-go zones, because even when you talk about that mastermind, the mainstream press doesn't always give us all the information. Mm-hmm. Right there in that, quote, suburb of Paris. You just mentioned another one, which is very close to the European Union. And this is something, at least in this country, we can learn some lessons from. You cannot allow a particular area of the country or any particular area of your city to be a no-go zone, because it just becomes a breeding ground and really even a recruiting ground for future terrorists.
Well, this guy is with an organization called Sharia for Belgium, if that says anything to you. And, we have neighborhoods that are similar to that in certain places in the U.S., and they are not a good idea.
We have Jeremy Dice with us, and his senior counselor with Liberty Institute. Usually we're talking about liberty issues and religious liberty issues, but today maybe we can focus on. And Jeremy, you've been watching what's unfolded this last week. Your thoughts?
Oh, I think more than anything that I've seen, well, I guess there are 2 thoughts of mine. One, there's something of this debate that's going on Facebook and Twitter and other places right now about whether or not Christians are being compassionate enough, or whether we're being too zealous in our goal for national security, and we ought to be welcoming these. It smacks a little bit about the Starbucks Red Cup controversy, quite frankly. I don't think there's really that many people that are this conflicted about this issue. We understand the need for security, and we must abide by those things, and that is a proper and good role of government to be doing those things. They do not bear the sword in vain, Paul says to us in Romans. They ought to be foremost protecting the people that they represent. At the same time, we are a very compassionate people in this country in terms of billions and trillions of dollars that we send throughout the world, not to mention the people that we put everywhere in the world, including missionaries, to do amazing things. And we welcome people still to our shores, and we ought to do that. I think what is missing, and this is the second part of what I think I've seen the most of here, I think what's missing right now is a lack of confidence in our leaders. And that really is primarily at the executive level laid there, but I think it also bears down also to the legislative levels and elsewhere. I'm just supremely disappointed in our president and how he has treated the situation from beginning to end. There's some great lines. I think we're going to look into some stories later on that can pull this out. But I frankly think people are not concerned about being too compassionate, right, or less than compassionate right now. They're just right now seeing the guy who's supposed to protect me isn't. And what do I do about that? And the natural reaction to that is I'm going to protect my backyard. And I think that's a fair assessment for most people. And whether or not my assessment is right that our leadership has failed us on that or not, I think we kind of feel like it has at the very least.
And again, you have about 60% of the governors so far, mostly Republican, but some Democrat, that are saying, wait a minute, we don't want them to come to our backyard. And then the federal government saying, well, there's no way you can prevent those. And as we talked about just yesterday, the fact is some of them showed up in Louisiana. The governor, Bobby Jindal, running for president up until a few days ago, now he's stepped down, didn't know they were there, found out about it from a local news media, and then actually found out that one of them just wandered off. And then, of course, in testimony yesterday in front of Lamar Smith, the undersecretary there for Homeland Security, acknowledged that really we only track them for a few months because after that they're considered to be legal residents, which could be on the pathway to citizenship. When we find out that some of them have the last name of Sarnoff and blow up individuals at the Boston Marathon, or others that have been caught before they were able to blow someone up or kill somebody, I think there's a reasonable concern there. It's not compassion, Penna. I think it's common sense, isn't it?
Yeah, we've had the one of the reasonable people from the Democrat Party in our administration that has spoken out has been the head of the FBI, James Comey. Mm-hmm. And even he, there have been some proposals. One was passed the House, but probably won't pass the Senate, and the president would not sign it anyway. That had to do with, certifying any refugee that came in. The FBI would have to do it, and the Department of Homeland Security. And he just said it would just be impossible to do that. And he's made some statements that have been factual from experience rather than political rhetoric like we hear coming out of, the president's mouth. And so, thankfully also there are some Democrats in Congress who voted for the bill yesterday. Mm-hmm. There are Democrat governors because, the American people want to be safe. And that's the federal government's really their most important job to be doing that. It's not compassion to people from
and look, we've been saying on a variety of issues that the emperor has no clothes on, and I think what we see now, the lack of clothing in this circumstance, is the reality that there are a significant number of people in leadership that do not believe that actual evil exists. Right? They're just, if we're just nicer to them, they'll be nicer to us. No, these are evil people that are intent upon destroying us, period. And they've got a responsibility. They're going to have to answer first to the people. Those that are still bearing elections are going to still have to answer to the people at some point. But at some point, I fear for them because they will have to answer to a higher authority at some point, and that's going to be a very dangerous thing when they see ultimate good in front of their face and have to stand in front of them and say, what did you do about evil? You were tasked with protecting these people about it all. What did you do?
Let me just mention, we're going to coming to a break, but we have posted the article there about how the House voted yesterday. So if you'd like to know how your representative voted, because we encourage you to contact them, that's on the website. And today we'll talk more about this in just a minute, an opportunity for you to contact your two senators about that same particular piece of legislation. So if you've already done your duty and contacted your representative, we've made it easy to contact your two senators on this issue as well. Let's take a break. It is Weekend Edition. We'll take more of the conversation around the table and then take some phone calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
No doubt you've heard the phrase, the barbarians are at the gate. It described what happened when the barbarian hordes descended on Rome. Mark Stein employs a powerful turn of phrase with the title of his recent column, "The Barbarians Are Inside and There Are No Gates." He was writing about the jihadist attack on Paris, but he could just as easily have been writing about any country in Europe or even in North America. It is easy to see that refugees are flooding into Europe from Syria and other parts of the Middle East. We also know that ISIS operatives have used this mass migration to infiltrate into these countries. At least one of the jihadists who attacked innocent citizens in Paris came into the country this way. The barbarians are in the country precisely because there is no gate. The open borders in the European Union have allowed them to move freely and attack at will. The ironies surrounding this terrorist action are many. The president stated in one interview on Good Morning America that ISIS has been contained and is not gaining strength. His administration also announced that the U.S. State Department is planning to open a processing center for Syrian refugees in Erbil, Iraq. After all, we need to be able to process the 10,000 refugees America has decided it will take. In light of these recent attacks on places like Beirut and Paris, shouldn't the world leaders get together to plan appropriate measures and strategies? Well, sleep well, America. Many of these leaders are coming together this month in Paris, but they aren't gathering to discuss Muslim terrorism. They're meeting to talk about climate change. You have to wonder how serious all this talk about fighting terrorism really is. We need more than just mere promises and candlelight vigils. We need world leaders to be as serious about fighting jihadist and Muslim terrorism as many of them seem to be about fighting supposed global warming. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dice with us. Let me just mention, on our website this week, we've encouraged you to contact your member of Congress. And yesterday, of course, the House did vote to halt, at least put a pause on the Syrian refugees until we could guarantee that we would be able to vet them. Now, of course, that has gone to the Senate, and if you would like to contact your two senators, we have made it easy for you. Go back to the website, pointofview.net, and ask your senators to support legislation that would prevent terrorists from being admitted to the country posing as Syrian refugees. Again, the plan is to have 10,000, but eventually to have 100,000 Syrians coming to this country. And we certainly welcome those peace-loving ones, but we are certainly concerned about those who are not. And the vetting process, as Penna pointed out, by FBI Director James Comey is a concern. And just think of the impact that ISIS has made. James Comey recently, when he spoke to the National Association of Attorneys General, said that we have ISIS operatives in all 50 states and levels of radicalization. And today, Jim Dennison in his Dennison Forum went through just a short list, and I'll give it real quickly. ISIS secured a home base of operations in Syria and Iraq when it seized land in June of 2014, declared a caliphate. Then ISIS has expanded operations with military affiliates in 11 countries, so it cannot be defeated by attacks on its home base. Even if we destroyed ISIS in Syria and Iraq now, we would not stop the movement, he says. Then now, of course, ISIS has been attacking the West, and what happened in Paris could happen in any city. And of course, as I mentioned before, the U.S. State Department has been following this as well. 27 different radical Muslim terrorist groups operating in the world. So The attack today in Mali was Al-Qaeda, which is different than ISIS. And you have all sorts of groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, and Islamic Jihad. The list goes on. 27 different terrorist groups around the world. This is something that will be with us for some time, won't it, Penna?
Well, I think so. And the sad part about it is, I think if we exude strength and certainty that we can actually handle the situation, if we exude that as really the greatest power in the world still, then some of this doesn't happen. But we have not been showing that for the last, pretty much the last 7 years. And so things are exploding. I mean, I don't want to blame all of this on the president we have, but there is a lot that he has done that has fostered this situation where we've got terror threats everywhere now.
And again, we can even say that we could see success if we were determined. Let's look at what's happened recently. Remember Jihadi John? That's the face, or at least part of the face that you saw when he was executing all those individuals. Well, he was killed in a drone strike. You mentioned just a minute ago the mastermind of not only the attack in Paris, but the attack on the train. He was taken out by the French police. And earlier in the week, I talked about how the German police foiled this because they actually caught some of those individuals in Germany who had AK-47s and bombs and all sorts of things, and they were just caught on a routine traffic stop and kept from actually creating more havoc. So we do have the ability, and whenever we've turned our law enforcement people loose, whenever we've turned loose our Defense Department, we've been successful. We just need to turn some of those individuals loose, don't we?
Turn our special forces loose. Those guys can handle a tremendous amount and are able to work on a minimal basis of working with people, the resistance in various countries that are able to take indigenous people to protect their own lands. And that's a great opportunity to fight the evil over there without having to come into here. The discussion about the refugees is irrelevant if we're discussing about keeping the bad guys over there rather than allowing them to infiltrate our borders here. But to simply say we've got to simply welcome every single person onto these shores without any concern about people here to do us harm is just so entirely short-sighted. I don't know how anybody can make the actual confident-faced argument about it. Look, we as Americans are extremely compassionate people. And if we, as a country, had confidence in our leadership that they are confidently protecting us elsewhere, I guarantee you we would welcome with open arms anybody of the tired, the poor, the hungry, the huddled masses, as it says in the Statue of Liberty, to come in here. We have no problem with that. What we have a problem with is confidence. Their word to say, oh, no, they're coming. Trust us. We'll take care of this for you. Now, mama didn't raise no dummy. And most of these people in the country have been raised by that same mama. And so look, protect us, take your job seriously, and we'll follow you. But if you don't, and you haven't, then don't believe us. Don't come to us like we need to follow you on every single thing.
Some of the remarks that have been made that almost make it sound like the Republican Party is more the enemy than ISIS. And, the one that the president made about widows and orphans was interesting, I thought, because really when you take that to its logical conclusion, bringing possible terrorists into the country, which is very likely that there would be some terrorists among the Syrian refugees, that would make more widows and orphans of Americans. And so to show the pictures, like the media does, and of young Syrian children that have lost their homes or have fled, I mean, it does pull at your heartstrings. It really, truly does. But you also have to think with your brain and think about the repercussions of making a decision like that.
What about this idea that has been proposed, and Donald Trump is getting credit for it, but others have proposed it, of having safe zones wherever it might be? It could be Turkey, it could be Jordan, wherever it might be. Because ultimately, I would think some Syrians would like to go back to their homeland. We know that there are a lot of Christians in these refugee camps. We've raised $57,000, which we've sent to the Cradle Fund to help the Christians in those Christian refugee camps, because most of them don't necessarily want to come to the United States or to Germany or to France or anywhere else. They would like to go back to their homeland in Iraq. And it seems to me that, first of all, it makes more sense to minister to those individuals over there. And we can send ministers over there. Matter of fact, fact, the reason we use the Cradle Fund is because the money's put in the hand of pastors who are obviously ministering to people and maybe even leading others to the Lord and those kinds of things. But it is certainly a better model, I think, if they want to come back to Syria someday when it settles. And more importantly, it's a whole lot less expensive because Congress this week said that it's 12 times more expensive to bring a refugee over here and to do the settlement than to keep them there in, which I know are huge refugee camps right now, but with the goal at least of being able to go back to the homeland from which they came.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably an argument that we won't have today about what we should do to help that settling process in Syria and Iraq. But, yeah, those countries, hopefully they'll be ripe for everybody coming back someday. And if everyone's absorbed into the American system and are over here, that's not going to happen. You know, we've lamented the fleeing of Christians from the Middle East, too. So to bring, I mean, it is, you know, I can understand that we want to protect Christians because they are the ones that are the most vulnerable. But I do think that there have got to be some creative ways that can be thought of over there to make it, you know, maybe make the camps better, meeting the needs of people, or getting more security there or something. I mean, yes, it will cost money, but as you said, Kerby, it's going to cost a lot to bring people here.
Yeah,
probably more.
What about those widows and orphans? Because, okay, let's just concede the argument for a minute, which I thought was disingenuous, but okay, we'll concede it. Some of the women could also be terrorists. We saw that the one woman blew herself up, suicide bomber. If you go into these madrasas, we've been talking about this, Penna, for decades, about the kinds of awful kind of theology, in quotes, that's being taught in those schools, that even at a young age they're taught to go and kill other individuals. So even with that comment, even first of all, most of the 72% of all the refugees right now are male. But okay, what about those women and orphans? Some of them could be terrorists as well. And I don't want to extend that too far, but at the same time, I think we have to recognize how dangerous all of this could be, and you just simply don't know. And because you don't know, sometimes when you don't have good information, it's a good time to hit the pause button, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It is a good time. You know, I've been reading the last couple of days about a situation, I think it was in 2011 in Bowling Green, Kentucky, where they found they found out there were some Syrian refugees there who had terrorist tendencies, and they actually stopped the whole refugee program for 6 months.
Yes.
And no one even knew about it. It wasn't a big deal. So, you know, I think this is political right now. Like, I think the administration is actually digging in its heels for political reasons and no other good reason.
Yeah, that story was done by Brian Ross, and it was on ABC News, and it was talking about how they had intel on two individuals. One actually admitted when he was in Iraq that he actually had blown up various individuals with IEDs, and then we let them into the country. So we had better vetting then because Iraq was not quite a failed state because we had people on the ground. We have nothing with Syria right now. So, Jeremy, I got to take a break, but I'll give you a chance when we come back because I can see you're ready to speak.
Look, we've had a continual campaign going for the last 7 years or 8 years now, and it would be at some point wonderful if our leadership would start governing here. And because they haven't, they just simply have said, "Hey, look, we can keep on politicking this issue." And therefore, we shut off debate. We talk in cold terms as us versus them and not we as Americans. And therefore, nobody's confident in our leadership with all this. We can't have a debate about this right now because the president has deemed you a bigot if you don't follow his commands. And that's not fair.
We've posted an article called How the President Demonizes Dissent. You can read that one. But we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Kerby Anderson and Point of View don't have major corporate support. We need your support to continue. As U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert told us recently,
it just scares me to think about that voice of reason, a Christian voice, a wise man. I hate to think about what would happen if your voice were silenced just because the money was not there to stay on the air.
Make a difference starting at just $1 a day, $30 a month, or $65 underwrites 1 minute of our program. 1 minute standing for fiscal responsibility, promoting a sane foreign policy, defending the reliability of the Bible. Please pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Do what you can. 1-800-347-5151 or visit online, pointofview.org. pointofview.net. Click the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team today. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Weekend edition, Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dice, and let's go to Wisconsin first and talk to Joe. Joe, thank you for calling today.
Hi, how are you doing?
Very good. You have the floor. What would you like to share?
Well, I was telling your receptionist that in order for me, I'm an over-the-road truck driver. In order for me to leave our country to Mexico or Canada, I have to have a passport to prove who I am, what I'm hauling, and is it okay to enter your country? Why is it then that these refugees, and my heart goes out to some of them, because some of them end up being, they don't have anything. But on the other hand, until we see proper documentation of who this person is, their origin, what they do, why are they wanting to enter our country, refugee or not, they should have a passport. The government should say, hey, wait a minute, we require our people, in order to leave and come back, a passport. You get on an airplane and fly to England, you won't even get on that airplane until you have a passport. Why is it we can keep bringing thousands of people into this country, no passport, and promise them what we've been promised from birth on up?
Well, again, a lot of it has to do with the fact that, of course, Syria right now is a failed state. You're not going to get Bashar al-Assad to issue a passport for these Syrian refugees. And, of course, we recognize that sometimes individuals come here because they have been persecuted or whatever. So we do provide that. But what I think is going to happen very quickly, as we heard in some of the congressional testimony yesterday, is we're going to bring them in. We'll watch them for a few months. But if we lose track of them, well, we just lose track of them. But eventually, after 1 year, they have permanent resident status. And that's a step towards becoming citizens. And I also want to add one more thing to the table. What about individuals that are maybe right now in India, they're in China, maybe they're in Kenya, they may be in even Afghanistan, and they've been waiting to come to this country, and they've been trying to actually go through the process of naturalization. It almost feels like some of these refugees get put to the front of the line. Penna, what's your thoughts?
The other question's been asked by Ted Cruz, and that are these truly refugees or are they migrants? Many of them have already been settled in camps, and now they want to come, but they're not really fleeing at this point. And so, he's making the point that perhaps that's not the time, and really the criteria doesn't exist either to enable them to come, but they're still demanding to come. So we need to be watching that. This is a hard situation because we don't like to, especially when we know there's so many Christians being persecuted. We don't like to turn people out, and sometimes you have to make some very hard calls.
Well, certainly. Jeremy?
This is when you have to, as a person who follows Christ, you must unite your heart and your head. If we're led entirely by our heart, of course we're going to open the borders and have people pour in here and welcome them, and put an extension on your house to put them in the back room if you have to. And frankly, I think Americans would do that if push came to shove on a lot of these cases. But we also need to be very wise. We need to recognize that there is evil in this world, and it is out to get you. And we happen to be the greatest target on. Not to minimize that. The fact demonstrates to us repeatedly that they don't even think evil exists. That they're just misled. And maybe they weren't hugged enough as a kid. I don't know. Whatever it might be, that they don't really take this threat seriously, or at least they portray themselves as not taking the threat seriously to us. That's why people are so scared about this. Do we have a foreign policy on how to address this great evil in this country? I mean, can we come up with that in the next 10 minutes as to what our foreign policy actually is? What is our foreign policy of taking on the JV squad, right? I mean, what defense are we going to play, man-to-man or zone? Well, what is it? What are we doing? And I don't think any of us, as sitting here right now, whether you are as informed as you can be or just the casual observer, can quickly articulate what our foreign policy actually is on the situation. And that puts people in danger. It just plainly does. And so I think it is, you said at the beginning of the show, Penna, that this seems to be a trumped-up political situation by the left to somehow demonize the political opponents of the right. I think that's exactly right. When they constantly accuse us of not being compassionate enough, it's impossible to come back and say, well, you're not being protective enough, because we play right into the narrative, don't you? Well, this is not either or. This is a must of a both and. We are a compassionate people, and we will continue to be so. But we may not be taken under by our kindness to be taken advantage of. That is well, number one, it's rude. Number two, it's unsafe, and we ought not to be doing that. Number three, it's horrible political philosophy.
Might just also mention that while we're talking about Syrians, this is a Syrian leader that is in New York City. And here he is a community leader. He's from Syria. And he has told the New York Post that ISIS is absolutely here in the United States. He even goes on to say that I believe the terrorists from Syria have been coming in the United States not only in the past years, but way before that. And he believes that ISIS is already at work. So people that are here who came from Syria, who now are kind of becoming some of the spokespeople, are acknowledging that. So if you see this as anti-Syrian or anti-Muslim, the people that are actually on that side, they are Muslim, they are from Syria, are acknowledging now that they're in America, we want you to keep us safe too, because we believe that some of this actually indeed has been taking place.
Yeah, and we need to recognize also that not all the bad guys are Syrian or of Syrian origin. There are a lot of people that are just using that as the opportunity to continue to wreak havoc upon the United States and our policy of belief in the individual to do what is right and good. There are lots of people now. They seem to be the most obvious threat right now, and let's focus upon ban just because they wanted to bring down the great white Satan of the United States and Afghanistan. So we can do both things here. And, you know, I want to give our leadership the benefit of the doubt as much as I want to here, but it's very difficult to be able to trust our leadership when they push to the front of the line refugees that are intermixed, obviously, with some people who wish to do us harm. They designate certain cultural groups as persecuted in various parts of the world, and yet the people who are literally having their heads ripped from their bodies are left off that very designation. It's very difficult when they simply say we're going to elevate Islamic refugees, but we're not going to qualify the Christian persecuted bunches in both these camps as well as on the ground in these countries as worthy of our protection. It becomes very difficult for me to trust that they are thinking rationally as well as thinking with their heart.
Yes, Faith McDonald was on with us earlier this week, and we've posted her article that you can read as well. U.S. Christian groups are prioritizing Muslim refugees over Christian ones. Here's why. And so, again, you can read some of that as well. Let's take another phone call just before we get back into some other issues, and we'll head out to Missouri this time. Sean, thank you for calling.
Oh, thank you. Listen, I just wanted to make a comment about the vetting process, and that is, to me, I think is lacking. It's very lacking, and the government, not just the government, whoever is in charge of this needs to be more diligent. And not only that, they need to do more about the people here that are citizens who make terroristic threats, because they are treated lightly. Maybe they should start doing some deportation of citizens who want to cause mayhem here right in America. You know, they need to start thinking about that also.
Let me just mention that one of the things that Heritage Foundation put out by James Carafano and others, what a responsible Syrian refugee policy looks like for the United States after Paris Acts. Because, Sean, there's some people that are saying, well, can you maybe improve this? I mean, if you don't like what the government's doing right now, are there alternatives in Penna? And really, I would have to say, Jeremy, we've got some alternatives. People with a lot more experience in government than actually some of the people in government right now. Isn't that sad to say? Some of these people have served in other administrations and have more experience than the people that are actually in the administrations right now, have some very creative and I think much more reasonable ideas about what this might look like.
Well, the Heritage piece mentions several things. One of them is intelligence and making their risk assessments based on intelligence. But as you mentioned, that report by Cheryl Atkinson was basically, you know, Obama would just plug his ears and, you know, I don't want to hear it and speak loudly so he can't let any of the truth coming from our intelligence services get in about these things. So he doesn't want to hear it. But we should be making our risk assessments based on intelligence and consulting with Congress on how to alleviate those risks. And then we should be dealing with Syria. I mean, I'm not sure what the military strategy should be there, but we definitely have the military strength and power to deal a blow to ISIS, really to wipe them out. We could. Mm-hmm. It's a matter of what are we going to decide to do. What we have not been doing is we haven't even intimidated them. at all. In fact, we've emboldened them. And then we should be following the law without executive overreach. Heritage has got some good ideas. We can continue to discuss those after the break.
We will, and we'll be back and take some more phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Be right back.
Political polls are becoming less and less reliable. The closely watched recent gubernatorial election in Kentucky provides the latest example. Incumbent Governor Jack Conway was leading Republican Matt Bevin 44 to 41% on October 30th in the average of polls compiled by Real Clear Politics. But 4 days later, on November 3rd, Bevin won 53 to 44%. Michael Barone is senior political analyst for the Washington Examiner. He says that lately, pre-election polls are vastly understating support for right-of-center candidates. And not just in the U.S. It happened in the recent elections in Great Britain, and also in Israel and Argentina. But as recently as 2012, the distortion went in the opposite direction. Democrats' results were understated. Mitt Romney lost several states where the polls showed him leading. Michael Barone points out in a Wall Street Journal op-ed entitled "Why Political Polls Are Often Wrong" that polls were very accurate when most households had landlines. That is no longer the case. According to the National Health Interview Study in 2003, only 2% of Americans lacked a landline telephone. Now, 40% don't have one. And of those who have landlines, many don't answer them. And people who do answer their phones are less willing than in the past to be interviewed for polls. If polling companies call cell phones, they must, by law, do it manually. No machines doing automatic calls. That gets expensive. Another vehicle for polling is the Internet, but Michael Barone says this risks producing unrepresentative samples because Internet usage is higher among certain groups than others, and because Internet respondents are, in effect, volunteers. The Gallup organization, which has been polling for 80 years, won't conduct presidential polls this election cycle. Pew Research hasn't been doing them either. Michael Barone, also a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, says his colleague there, who has been analyzing polls for decades, says we may be seeing the end of polling as we know it. Mr. Barone wouldn't go that far, but says reading political polls is becoming more an art than a science. Another thing to remember regarding presidential polls is that polls this far away from the election are close to useless in predicting the actual winner. And in this particular case, there's a huge factor that distorts the polls: celebrity. Red State's Leon Wolf stated the obvious. By the time he entered the race, almost no one of voting age in America did not know who Donald Trump was. He's the only GOP candidate who cannot say getting more media exposure will help him in the polls. Mr. Wolf points out that as other Republican candidates have been introduced to the public and gotten more exposure, many of them have caught up in head-to-head matchups with the likely Democrat nominee, Hillary Clinton. Trump has lost some ground in that regard. It's 3 months until the first state votes. An eternity in politics. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Jeremy Dice with us. And Penna, just before I take some more phone calls, you were kind of going through this list of things that we could do to develop what we would call a responsible Syrian refugee policy. And a lot of this comes from the Heritage Foundation, much of it written by James Carafano, who's been on this program with us before, and certainly brings a wealth of experience in terms of not only the academic world but also the political world, and has put together what I think could be something the president could actually implement if he'd be willing to sit down and read it. And what we're hearing from, as you mentioned a minute ago, Cheryl Atkinson, the journalist, is they are finding that individual sources close to the White House are saying the president is just not even willing to hear information about intelligence surrounding the radical Islamic terror groups. This is concerning.
It's not it's like sticking your fingers in your ears and just humming la 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 really loud so you can't, nothing can come in to change your narrative. And we mentioned Comey, who is the FBI director, James Comey. And, right after this happened, you had Josh Earnest saying, no, it's fine to still bring Syrian refugees in, the same amount, 10,000 that we had planned to bring in. We have a system that's, second to none. But Comey says we can query our database until the cows come home.
I saw that.
But there will be nothing show up because we have no record. So these people, they're refugees from Syria where they've been embattled for 4 years. There's not a lot of data on these people. So that is just not true to say that we have information on these people that we can, use to find out the right people to bring in. So that's, I think that's a bit of common sense in this heritage piece. Also, focusing refugee efforts on individuals on whom we have intelligence and information or can acquire it easily. So there might be some that we could bring in eventually that we know, but we need to really know them before we bring them in.
And that's why I think, again, these refugee camps set it up. And I mentioned just a minute ago, but again, you can look this up. But here is an individual, is kind of a leader in the New York area. He's in Brooklyn. His name is Arafat Sukkar, and he is Syrian. And yet he is saying, we recognize that ISIS operatives probably are sneaking in. And so you can't accuse him of being anti-Syrian because he's Syrian. You can't convince anybody that he's anti-Muslim because he's Muslim. But that's what he is saying about his own community and his concern that we need to keep people safe. He would love to have more Syrians come in, as Jeremy was talking about. Obviously appreciates the compassion side of this equation, but he also includes the common sense side of it, which seems to be lacking right now in Washington, D.C.
Well, look, the common sense stopped a long time ago, right? I mean, let's be honest, this situation is the president's own making, right? We determined years ago that, we're just not going to deal with Syria. We just don't want to get our boots dirty. We don't want to get our hands dirty here. We're just going to, look what has happened. When everybody said that things were going to go wrong, they were right. Things went wrong. And so when the left demands that we be compassionate, they're being incredibly disingenuous because the first role of government has been abdicated, right? And that's what we've got to continue to come back to here. What is the purpose and role of government? And if we're going to follow Romans 13 instructions correctly, that is to promote the space for the good and to punish that which is evil. That is abundantly clear throughout the Christian worldview. And if that's what we need to be holding our standard up as, then we need to hold it up to our leaders and find out, okay, have they promoted what is good and punished what is evil? They have not. And they continue to not do so. And then they continue to turn around and condemn those who wish to do good for not doing good enough. And that's not right. And it's wrong. And further than that, as I said at the beginning of the show, the fact is that the American people are an extremely compassionate people. They have been deserved by their leadership from the executive level on the way down. Everybody that has to touch on this issue, that's had to deal with whatever our foreign policy actually is here. The problem is not that is there a lack of compassion, whatever. The problem right now is that our leadership is not existent. We can pine for the good old days of Ronald Reagan all we want. We do that because he wasn't such a brilliant leader, though he was a confident leader. We knew where he was going. We understood what his plan was, and it was the total defeat of the Soviet Republic, right? That this is where we're going. This is come after. If the president would actually point out to me today where we're going and what the plan was, I might actually be willing to follow behind him here, but he's not. And Peggy Noonan wrote this great article today at the Wall Street Journal called Uncertain Leadership in Perilous Times. And she's a little bit critical of the president, saying that, what was the great line? On this issue, the American president is amazingly barely relevant. That's kind of stark terms, but I think she's calling the spade a spade here. But she ends it, I think, wonderfully by saying what people hunger for now from their leaders is an air of shown and felt confidence, saying, I can do this. We can do it. The American people have followed those kind of great leaders before and have set the world free. We don't have that type of leadership right now, and that is the reason why American people are afraid.
I think one thing that is so frustrating for us as we talk about this, we're as Christians and conservatives, people listening, is that we want to defend what is good and right. We want to be a good country, but we have a left now that's in control that doesn't even have the same definition of good and evil as we do. And when President Bush, when we had 9/11 and President Bush named an axis of evil, and of course he was criticized for that, but at least people rallied around it because there was a calling of evil of what it was. And this president, and this really, it's not just the president, it's the left. They don't even have a definition of evil. Really, the most evil national security enemy right now is climate change. in their minds. And so, when they are mushing up the waters like that, and you don't have who the enemy is, how can you defeat an enemy that you can't even define? So that's why really the next year is a little bit scary. And I think if this crisis in the world does not get the left out of power, I don't know what could.
Yeah, my commentary today was about that. I said that after this attack in Paris, you would hope that the world leaders would come to Paris, France. And I said, well, sleep well, America. They are. But actually, on November 30th, it starts the climate change conference. So we're bringing the world leaders together to talk about climate change. We should be bringing the world leaders together to talk about how to fight ISIS, which is just one of the many terrorist groups, 27 different Muslim terrorist groups. But when you, in the last Democratic debate, couldn't even get comments like Muslim terrorist. Now, I will give partial credit to Hillary Clinton. She now did use the word jihadist the other day.
Yep.
But that's about as far as you're going to get. And I think it illustrates, again, part of the problem. Because, back to your point, Jeremy, if you don't know who the enemy is and you don't know what the strategy is, probably going to fail.
That's exactly right. And meanwhile, we have people complaining. We have these aggressive terrorists around the world literally blowing themselves up and stabbing people literally in the back and shooting them in the face. Interestingly enough, the president never said we don't ever see mass shootings in public in other countries, and yet we see mass shootings in public in Kenya and Mali and Paris, and we're completely silent about gun control in those countries for some silly reason. But the reality is we have all this aggression going on, and we're worried about words like microaggression on college campus right now. The silliness of the coddled American youth right now has got to be called out, and it's got to stop, because what's going to happen is we're going to see more of what we're currently seeing right now into the future, where people are going to want to rather sing Kumbaya than rather go in and deal with that which is evil. If we can't define evil, if we're not even allowed to talk about evil in existence, be it at the White House or on Yale's campus, where are we going to talk about this?
Well, we're going to talk about some of that in the second hour, so it's perfect setup. But we'll also take some of your phone calls on ISIS. I apologize, some of you on the line. If you just hold through the break, you'll be first up, because we want to hear some of your comments. And if you've been wanting to contact your members of Congress this last week, we encourage you to contact your representative. Now we have an opportunity for you to contact your 2 senators, and at the very least, ask them to vote for what the House overwhelmingly passed yesterday. So again, all of that is at the website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break, and we'll take some more phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
This time of year, it seems everyone's looking for a better, more affordable healthcare solution. But with costs rising and options limited, where do you turn? If you're a Christian, you turn to Medishare. It's not insurance. It's over 154,000 believers who share each other's medical bills. It's about half the cost of healthcare insurance programs, and it's fully acceptable under the law. Best of all, Medishare is based on the timeless principles found in God's Word. You never pay for things that go against your beliefs. Medishare is healthcare that fits your family and your faith.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your healthcare. For your free information guide, call 844-45-BIBLE. Not available in Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical health care. Call 844-45-BIBLE. That's 844-45-BIBLE.
A big thank you to members of Truth Team 360. You make this program possible. Not a member yet? Join today at pointofview.net. Click on Donate Now and become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour is our weekend edition. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We've been talking about ISIS. We've been talking about the refugee resettlement program. And in just a few minutes, we'll get into what's been happening on college campuses, something that we've been wanting to cover all week. And I think there's a very definite connection. And Jeremy Dice sort of helped us with some of that connection. Penna Dexter with me as well. But let's take a few phone calls just before we finish off some of the topics we've been dealing with in terms of foreign policy and the refugee program. So we'll go to Ann in Texas, KBJS. Ann, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for all the work that you do. I would just like to make a comment. You know, these guys, the women and all that are coming from Syria, the refugees, there are so many of those young men that can be trained to fight back. I mean, they can be trained by us, other countries that are in alliance with us. We have men and women that are away from their families fighting in Afghanistan, Iraq, and many other places. Yes, I am very sympathetic that they would have to be away from their families. But look at what our guys and our ladies are doing for our country. Why can't those young men, instead of running, be trained to fight back in a proper way? I don't understand that.
Well, one possibility has been that. Of course, we don't exactly have the world's best record of training these various indigenous people and then having them fight. I mean, we sort of thought, well, we'll train the Mujahideen, and out of that came Osama bin Laden. We were trying to train the Syrian fighters, and then they, in some cases, went over to ISIS. So, again, if we could identify some of that, it's difficult because on the one hand I say, you know, imagine we had an invasion in this country. I got a feeling Jeremy and I would pick up our weapons and we go fight for our families. You know, we wouldn't run away. That's the last thing we would do. But on the other hand, sometimes you recognize when there's nothing you can do. Think about the Jews that left Germany because they recognized that there was not a chance that they would be able to change that. That's a tough question. But to answer your question, the reason we're not doing that right now is because the president hasn't probably even thought about it, much less tried to come up with a program by which it could happen.
Well, I think that's why I ultimately have great confidence that this country is going to be safe, is because we are a well-armed country. And down here in Texas, I think we're in a very safe spot here for all that. But beyond just the sheer armament of the citizenry in this country, we've got guts in this country, and we've got the ability to stick to what we believe in, independent of our leadership. At times, we would not have won a Revolutionary War, nor 2 world wars, had we not had that ability to defend ourselves and ultimately repel those who would seek to undermine us, including our political leadership if we have to. But beyond all that, you know, I think we have actually shown some capability in this regard in this comment that Ann has made here. The Northern Alliance soldiers that were already engaged in battle with the Taliban and literally riding horses with them, fighting the first cavalry charge in the 21st century. It's a remarkable story of these special forces, how they did that. But what we have failed at is relying upon that strategy alone.
Right.
It seems to be once we go in there and kind of displace them, that then we see disaffection. And that's where we get some problems going along the way. But if we can resurrect that kind of strategy to do what we've done in the past and succeeded with, If we had done that in Syria, for instance, and looked at the rebel fighters that were already there, just needed to be stood up and stood with, I think we would not be facing many of these problems that we're facing today. But this just goes again to what we talked about at the end of the last hour, that our leadership has failed to understand the very basic function of government. They have been waging a great political campaign for well nigh 8 years now. It's time to stop politically campaigning to identify what an actual foreign policy is, stick with it, and allow people to be led. But if you're not going to identify that, then please don't criticize us for failing to be compassionate.
Yes.
It seems like if we have the right strategy with regard to a conflict, that we don't want to get involved in ourselves. We don't want perhaps to send our troops into Syria, for instance. But if we ignore the situation and hope it goes away, which I think is what the left does, they trust in the basic goodness of the human heart, and so they think these things will just solve themselves. And they don't. And so I think you end up radicalizing more people. In other words, you might have had some opposition in Syria that we could have worked with, trained, provided arms to, if we identified who the actual good guys were.
Yes.
But the good guys can become bad guys sometimes just out of desperation.
Sure.
And also we're talking about, I think, one more comment to be made about the idea of bringing refugees here rather than keeping them overseas in safe places. I think this is Jeff Sessions that wrote this. It's somebody in Congress named Sessions. There's Pete Sessions, but I think this is coming from Jeff Sessions, the Heritage Foundation.
Yes, it is.
And he said, for the same cost of providing benefits to one refugee in America, vastly more refugees could be helped by establishing safe zones in Syria or surrounding countries until displaced persons can be safely returned home. This is the strategy likeliest to produce long-term political reform in the Middle East. Because if you take the Muslims that are moderate out, and you take the Christians out and bring them here, then who are you leaving there? You're leaving the people there that are not going to be a positive. He says it's not sound policy to encourage millions to permanently abandon their homes.
I would agree. And one of the things I said in Congress this week, and again, I haven't looked at the numbers, but I have to believe the members of Congress, is that it's 12 times more expensive to bring a refugee here and settle him or her as it would be to keep them over there, either in a safe zone or something else. And again, you're saying, well, we don't know who our friends are. Well, one set of friends that deserve some funding are the Kurds. The Peshmerga have demonstrated time and time again that they could defeat ISIS, at least in the Iraqi region. But our problem is we have a law that says it has to go through a actual state, and so it has to go through Baghdad, and so Baghdad is not allowing them to have the kind of weapons that they need to fight ISIS, because recognize ISIS in some cases is using our weapons that were left behind by America and by the retreating Iraqi troops to actually fight against the Peshmerga. So there's at least one set of friends that I would support, and I think we should support them. And I would think that with our air superiority and at least arming the Peshmerga, you have a better chance of beating ISIS. Doing what we're doing right now, you guarantee we have no chance.
That's right. And to kind of react a little bit on Ann's comment here, the caller, she said that there are so many young men that could be trained. The reason why that's not a viable option in the liberal left right now, the political left, that comment alone, they would debate as whether or not that's a microaggression. I'm not kidding. They would say, how dare she characterize these young men are the only ones that are able to defend their own country? Why not the women? Or why not the cisgendered ones that are over there, or the transgender? This would be the debate within a serious debate, no less, on college campuses at Mizzou and other places. It would fall right into the West Wing of the White House. Yeah. They would spend a governmental committee figuring out whether or not targeting young men to be trained in Syria in a patriarchal society would be a microaggression that would be befitting or unbefitting of the United States. That she has identified as, unwittingly, as the problem.
We did not have this discussion in World War I, even with a President, Woodrow Wilson, which I wouldn't say was one of the great presidents of America. We didn't have this decision as well and discussion in World War II with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but we're having it now. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, but we need to take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
No doubt you've heard the phrase, the barbarians are at the gate. It described what happened when the barbarian hordes descended on Rome. Mark Stein employs a powerful turn of phrase with the title of his recent column, The Barbarians Are Inside and There Are No Gates. He was writing about the jihadist attack on Paris, but he could just as easily have been writing about any country in Europe or even in North America. It is easy to see that refugees are flooding into Europe from Syria and other parts of the Middle East. We also know that ISIS operatives have used this mass migration to infiltrate into these countries. At least one of the jihadists who attacked innocent citizens in Paris came into the country this way. The barbarians are in the country precisely because there is no gate. The open borders in the European Union have allowed them to move freely and attack at will. The ironies surrounding this terrorist action are many. The president stated in one interview on Good Morning America that ISIS has been contained and is not gaining strength. His administration also announced that the U.S. State Department is planning to open a processing center for Syrian refugees in Erbil, Iraq. After all, we need to be able to process the 10,000 refugees America has decided it will take. In light of these recent attacks on places like Beirut and Paris, shouldn't the world leaders get together to plan appropriate measures and strategies? Well, sleep well, America. Many of these leaders are coming together this month in Paris, but they aren't gathering to discuss Muslim terrorism. They're meeting to talk about climate change. You have to wonder how serious all this talk about fighting terrorism really is. We need more than just mere promises and candlelight vigils. We need world leaders to be as serious about fighting jihadist and Muslim terrorism as many of them seem to be about fighting supposed global warming. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dice with us. And one of the things we've been talking about is this bill that passed the House of Representatives. We're not that thrilled with it, and our next caller isn't either. But if you are been saying, well, I want to do something, earlier this week we talked about how you could contact your representative. Now we have as a take action item to contact your two United States senators. But Eileen in Texas, listening on KAVX, wants to speak about that bill, and I would certainly welcome your comments. So go for it.
Hi, Kerby, thank you for taking my call, and thank you for all that you do. We've been calling this week on a bill that's H.R. 3314, and that was sponsored by Representative Brian Babin in July.
Yes.
And then the co-sponsors are Louis Gummert and Randy Weber. That's the real bill that we want, not this watered-down thing that they hurried up and passed yesterday, because that one's called the Resettlement Accountability National Security Act. So they just watered down that little bill yesterday to try to placate the people.
And again, as we've already pointed out, I doubt that either of those are going to be signed by the president. Of course, we also had Dana Rohrabacher's bill, H.R. 4017, Save Christians from Genocide, which is one I hope really would pass. And then, of course, also you have Michael McCall's bill, H.R. 3573, the refugee resettlement question. But, Penna, this is one of those struggles we have, because even this bill we don't like. But I'm not sure.
We can't even get the White House to agree to this bill. And I don't even know if it'll pass the Senate.
I'm not even sure it'll pass the Senate, but we wanted to give everybody at least an opportunity to contact their senators and their representative about that. But, Eileen, I think you've put on the table bill, again, H.R. 3314. And I think if people want to contact their representatives about that, we have provided opportunities for you to do so.
It's not unhumane or inhumane to take a pause from bringing refugees into this country, considering what has just happened. It just simply is not. And that argument is just a straw man. Ted Cruz has a bill. Here's a great bill, I think.
No, it's another one, yeah.
It's the Terrorist Refugee Infiltration Prevention Act of 2015. And it just says there's 5 countries that have terrorists that could be, they're trying to get into this country. Don't let anybody come in from any of those countries right now.
Makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense.
We have, according to Jay Johnson, Secretary of Homeland Security, we have identified, and this was a couple of months ago, so I'll use old numbers because I know the numbers are higher, 40 individuals that left this country, fought for ISIS, and have now come back to this country because they have an American passport. Now, I really believe in religious liberty, but at the same time, let me come to my religious liberty expert here, Jeremy Dice. When you exercise your religious liberty to go and kill people, I think your religious liberty stops at that point, doesn't it?
I would hope so. And that's actually not true, genuinely religious liberty. That's not, I don't know of any religion that is serious religion that would advocate the killing of people. We understand there are certain religions that pose as religions that go and want to kill people. But
so what about Islam?
Well, that's my point.
Okay.
That there are certain religions that seem to want to say, I'm a religion and we're here for peace and love and happiness. And yet, no, that's not actually the case. A true religion would be one that actually sees the apocalypse as something that will ultimately do away with evil, not promote further evil, and that sort of thing. But the point being here that again, we ought not to divorce our heart and our head here. When the house has a major plumbing leak in the walls and the basement starting to fill up with water, you go to the main shutoff valve and you turn the water off for a while, and then you figure out where the problem is and you plug the leak. That is a very simple, but I think analogous situation we can make to where we're at right now. We've got a problem. We've got serious security concerns here right now. Let's plug that leak right now, and then we can worry about bringing people in. It's not going to ultimately cause them grand harm to stay where they might be at right now. If they are truly refugees and are fleeing immediately for their life, I think we can take a close look at that and bring the right people in here at the right time. It doesn't seem like that's the case right now. This is, as you said earlier, Penna, a migration issue more than it is a refugee situation. Let's pause, take a deep breath, figure out what our actual foreign policy might be, pursue that strategy, and pursue it to its end.
Yeah, it seems like a reasonable step forward, but at the same time, I love your analogy. If you have a leak, what do you first thing you do? Turn off the water, obviously. Good point.
There are the people that are arguing for the refugees to come on the basis of compassion, but this is not what the left is arguing. And the left really wants to bring in people that will support the left. Mm-hmm. They want to grow and build, and that's why every opportunity that they have to bring people in from other countries that they can then mold and make into supporters of theirs. And it's sort of like, there have been people that have said that they're trying to build sort of an army from the left. I would not totally discount that could be the eventual goal of some of the radicals.
Whether it's an army or not, they're at least trying to continue to campaign. At some point, you need to engage in the government of what's good for this country. And it comes back to, maybe I'm hitting this point too hard today, but you got me on the soapbox, Kerby, so I'm going to keep on going on a little bit here. At some point, you've got to understand what the point of government is. It's not a political campaign to see if we can be us versus them. We are a country, and this country as a whole stands for something. Now, I may disagree with your foreign policy, but at least tell me what it actually is. You don't actually have one in this situation that we can rally behind or oppose. We're just simply being told, because you're not being compassionate enough, you're not a good Christian, you hypocrite. I can't have a debate at this point. I can't debate your foreign policy when you're calling me xenophobic and you're actually being xenophobic yourself on the whole thing. It's impossible to actually have the discussion when we don't have a matured leadership, and then we have the college co-eds that seem to be going into these positions of leadership as well, that are complaining about microaggressions and safe spaces when our space right now in this country is not safe.
I think it's just common sense that the goal of our national foreign policy should be security for Americans. That should be number one. And so after what happened in Paris happened, and you had this rethinking of our policy of refugees from Syria, you had, I forget how many governors, more than half of the governors said, it's really a national decision, but governors have something to do with facilitating bringing refugees in. And they're 28 to 31, something like that, said they would not
31
bring them in.
Least number I've heard, yeah.
So President Obama, demonized them for making that statement. And really, I think if he cared about bringing these people in and wanted to do it truly without politicizing it, he would have called each one of them and talked to them and tried to help them convince them that he's got a good vetting policy. And how do we work together to do this in a safe way? He did not do that. He instead, where was the first speech from? It was from another country.
It was Turkey.
Yeah. So that's where he spoke from. And again, just dividing the American leadership. That's his modus operandi.
And again, when they tried to do that, they did have kind of a conference call, which on that call was Governor Jerry Brown from California, the governor of New Hampshire, who are Democrats, as well as a lot of the Republican governors. And at the end, you had all these quotes from Jerry Brown, our governor of California, saying, we got the sense that there's no transparency here. They're basically saying, we're going to put them in your states. You cannot stop us. And we're not even going to tell you when they're going to go there or where we're going to put them. And now they've issued some lists of where some of those would be. But when you have some of your fellow Democratic governors, and there aren't that many anymore, as we well know, because most of the governors now are Republican, also saying, wait a minute, this is going to affect our state, because guess what? Most of the expense is not going to be paid by the federal government. When we put refugees of any sort in any state, and they have any kind of need, of course, they're going to have some very significant needs very early. Guess who gets to pay for it? Each one of the states pay for it, and that means those of you in those states where they are located are going to have to see your taxes go up, or else something is going to have to happen. Services are going to have to go down.
And I think we're seeing the governors reacting the most because they're the closer to the people.
Of course they are.
Yeah, and they're the ones that have to directly interact with the people in their constituency, and they're saying, look, stop it. We're not safe. Stop it. We don't have good leadership at the top. Don't work with the top there. But it also makes me very concerned when we've got the party leadership right now, and we've got a party candidate right now calling himself a democratic socialist, whatever that might mean, when we're seeing currently by someone who didn't run on a democratic socialist ticket saying, you're going to do what I tell you to do. That is extremely concerning. And every good American ought to be very frightened when the government comes and tells you you're going to do this. What did Ronald Reagan say that one time? The worst words to hear ever are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help
you. Yeah. Just before we take a break, let me just mention, when we come back, we've been dancing around the topic, so we'll get into that. Now, these will be micro, maybe even macro aggressions. So these are coming. Michelle Malkin talks about the radical college crybabies. Victor Davis Hanson says the university has gone feral. Jonah Goldberg talks about the campus commotion showing that we're raising fragile kids. And even interestingly enough, USA Today usually gives us liberal editorials, but their piece was campus adults need to educate students on free speech. There's something going on in campus. We've been talking about it. We'll cover some of that right after these important messages.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our teams stand strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Thought we'd shift topics for just a minute. We've been talking about what's been happening on college campuses, and I think there's a very definite connection, as you will see in just a moment. It is illustrated by the fact that even USA Today has a piece on campus adults need to educate students on free speech. There are others, like Jonah Goldberg, talking about the fact that perhaps the problem on campus is we're raising fragile kids. And then Victor Davis Hanson, who's been on the program with us as well, the university gone feral. So we thought we would focus some time and attention on that as well. Penna Dexter with me and Jeremy Dice. Let's talk about this. We're talking about the University of Missouri. We're talking about Yale University. We're talking about Dartmouth. We're talking about Princeton, Occidental, to mention just a few off the top of my head, and there are probably a long, long list. But what are some of the issues surfacing right now, Penna?
Well, I think some of the issues are really the easily offended collegiate mind.
Yes, well said.
That can be offended for all sorts of things and can turn around and take that out on certain teachers and administrators. And, I don't know where the root cause of it is. This particular piece in National Review by Jonah Goldberg seems to think our parenting styles may be at fault, simply that we're not allowing them to sort of learn to cope with opposition on the playground or whatever on their own. And so they're just so fragile that they can't handle anything. I don't know. Jeremy's got a great word that we've been using all day today, so it's probably the word of the day when it comes to this topic.
It's a frustrating word because they probably can define it to mean whatever you want it to mean, but the word is microaggressions, and everybody kind of, I bet you people have heard that word a lot and have no idea what it actually means. But it effectively is when someone is looking to be offended, they're going to call that a microaggression, right? And you say something that kind of tips them off, they're going to be microly aggressed against. You're not intending to be aggressive necessarily, but you're actually using something that is not politically correct, and therefore they're going to be ostracized and so to speak. They're going to be offended at something like that. But I think you hit the nail on the head here a little bit, Penna, because the problem that we're seeing with these students at Mizzou and Princeton, Yale, places that we at one point, the Ivy Leagues especially, had considered the thoughtful elite here. That we send our best students to Harvard and Yale and Princeton. But now they're encountering ideas that are counter to them, and they've been taught somewhere, either in parenting or within the school systems themselves, or maybe both, that this is the only way to think. And so when they encounter an idea that runs counter to them, they have no category with which to embrace that. They've not been taught to engage ideas and to debate them so that truth comes to the top. They've been dictated to them what the truth ought to be, whether or not it actually is. And therefore, whenever that goes askew from their worldview, their only reaction to that is anger. And that's a real problem. Because what those individuals are going to do is some point go into the marketplace at some time in their life. And hopefully, once they get beyond just the simple minimum wage level of job, and oops, I just may have committed a microaggression right there. Once they get into that actual real life world, they're going to run into having to come into terms with ultimate issues. And perhaps, as I'm talking about it, I'm thinking about it, perhaps that's actually part of the problem here, is that we have denied our children the ability or the privilege to think through ultimate issues. Yeah. And because we have denied them the ability to think through the existence of God, the existence of transcendent truth. We've denied all these different opportunities to them, and therefore once they actually run into ontological issues and tautological issues, they have no category with which to address them. That falls outside of my safe space, and therefore I'm done with it all. I got to push it away, or I've got to react angrily against it.
There's so much that's taboo in our culture to even talk about now, and I was thinking of asking both of you if you thought this campus issue that's spreading across the country, especially on liberal campuses, is the same as what happened back in the 60s, or is it different? I mean, we didn't have this PC culture back then.
Right.
We had, at least on the campus, ideas, sometimes objectionable ideas that were presented, but at least they could come side by side. But you don't have that anymore. I don't know. Do you think that the root is the same or different?
Well, at the root, I would say it's the same, because it goes down to sort of Genesis 3 issues. Did God really say yes or no? Because ultimately, the root is going to come down to that level of whether or not there exists transcendent truth, and yes or no is the answer to that question. But I think probably to get to this point up the tree, it's a branch off the same stem, where you have liberal ideas being out there, and classical liberalism says, okay, let's bring it, let's discuss it, and see if we can find something out to find some truth in it all. But what started, I think, there in the 60s and 70s was, well, if you don't respect my idea, you don't have the freedom to talk into this discussion. And when you begin shutting out those ideas, whether they be from a speech perspective or a religious liberty perspectives, we see both of those things happening. When you shut down debate and say you are not welcome into this debate because you bring out a different perspective than what is societally accepted, that is extremely dangerous, because it shuts down one's mind from thinking what could be truth here and allowing the debate to shape the truth, or truth to shape the debate is probably the better way to put that. And I think that's what we've seen, is that we've demanded of our students in particular that they believe one thing. It has really become almost religious in some respects, this political ideology be believed absent all other views. And if we don't, we have not trained our children to think through those things and to welcome debate as a way of shaping our understanding of the world. We instead try to dictate to our children what the world might be. This is kind of like helicopter thinking. You've heard of helicopter parenting. It's helicopter thinking. We're going to do the thinking for you. It's like our parents have chewed up being able to breathe and eat and all those sorts of things, but they can't function in terms of ideological engagement. And that's a genuine problem for our future.
I think things have changed a little bit. I got a column coming out that which I talked about when I first spoke on college campuses back in the 70s. We would have professors say, well, you've heard my point of view. I want to give you a different perspective. And so there was this idea of interchange of ideas, that the best ideas get to win. And so they would oftentimes give us that opportunity. But by the 1980s and certainly by the 1990s, when the politically correct culture came, they said, no, there's certain ideas that cannot be allowed to even be expressed on a college campus. And I think part of that has to do with, once you reject any kind of absolute truth, any kind of transcendent truth, and all beliefs are equally true, professors can't allow that, because as they say, well, if you want to believe that, fine, and somebody else wants to believe something else, fine, but then you got some neo-Nazi or KKK in the back saying, well, I believe in racism. Well, that can't be right. So pretty soon they began to say that certain views are not politically correct, and that's where we got into trouble, because now kids have taken this to such an extent that, as we find out at Yale, you can't say that, if you don't like that Halloween costume, well, grow up. Or, of course, at Duke University, if you use the phrase "man up," that's a microaggression there. Can't have taco bars at certain universities, and even the Constitution, apparently, from what I'm finding out, is a microaggression.
Yeah,
right?
at Oberlin, apparently, we're seeing now that the Constitution, they're saying that one professor anyway is saying is filled with it makes people hurt or angry and fearful for well, there used to be the actual actuating document of our country that secured our freedoms, rather than cause us to live in constant fear. These ideas of microaggression, you mentioned a couple of them. One of them at Yale was the word master, because that could be a microaggression stating about slavery.
Like a master's degree.
Well, they have different masters of different colleges that are like the ultimate,
right.
the top
you
speakers.
Can't use the term.
You can't use the term
That's
anymore.
existed for almost 300 years, too.
Right.
But all of a sudden, that's a bad word.
It's wrong because it's been associated with slavery, and obviously we're going to roundly condemn that as being against humanity, frankly. And so that's rightly condemned, but to extend that to say, I've mastered a topic, and therefore I have attained the level of master, and
that's offensive.
A master's degree would be a microaggression, wouldn't it? Wow. I mean, it basically is.
Like I said, you cannot make some of this up, and it's just gotten out of hand in terms of what is not tolerated on campuses today. And then, of course, you have at Princeton, we just mentioned Woodrow Wilson a minute ago, the students have occupied the offices there because they want to take the name off of Woodrow Wilson, who was the president of Princeton and was the president of the United States, off of there. And, it just goes on and on and on about some of the things that you might have heard in the 60s, but to a level that you wouldn't even, a 60s radical wouldn't have imagined here in the 21st century.
Right, and we got to go to break here in a little bit here, but we are seeing that now at Liberty Institute, where we concentrate only on the issue of religious liberty across the country. We're seeing this gentle creep well, it's not so gentle anymore, but we're seeing a creep into the world of religious liberty on these issues of, we used to call it political correctness, and maybe that's still the correct term, but because they have shut down everything else in terms of, quote, diversity, that term has been emptied of meaning except for the approved by the state definition thereof. And so when we come back from that, I can kind of give you a couple of examples as we're seeing these on the front lines right now as to how these microaggressions are impacting people's jobs and vocations.
Well, certainly. Well, that gets us back to religious liberty, which we oftentimes talk about. We usually do it at the front of the program. We'll do it at the end of the program right after this.
Political polls are becoming less and less reliable. The closely watched recent gubernatorial election in Kentucky provides the latest example. Incumbent Governor Jack Conway was leading Republican Matt Bevin 44 to 41% on October 30th in the average of polls compiled by Real Clear Politics. But 4 days later, on November 3rd, Bevin won 53 to 44%. Michael Barone is senior political analyst for the Washington Examiner. He says that lately, pre-election polls are vastly understating support for right-of-center candidates. And not just in the U.S. It happened in the recent elections in Great Britain, and also in Israel and Argentina. But as recently as 2012, the distortion went in the opposite direction. Democrats' results were understated. Mitt Romney lost several states where the polls showed him leading. Michael Barone points out in a Wall Street Journal op-ed entitled "Why Political Polls Are Often Wrong" that polls were very accurate when most households had landlines. That is no longer the case. According to the National Health Interview Study in 2003, only 2% of Americans lacked a landline telephone. Now, 40% don't have one. And of those who have landlines, many don't answer them. And people who do answer their phones are less willing than in the past to be interviewed for polls. If polling companies call cell phones, they must, by law, do it manually. No machines doing automatic calls. That gets expensive. Another vehicle for polling is the Internet, but Michael Barone says this risks producing unrepresentative samples because Internet usage is higher among certain groups than others, and because Internet respondents are, in effect, volunteers. The Gallup organization, which has been polling for 80 years, won't conduct presidential polls this election cycle. Pew Research hasn't been doing them either. Michael Barone, also a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, says his colleague there, who has been analyzing polls for decades, says we may be seeing the end of polling as we know it. Mr. Barone wouldn't go that far, but says reading political polls is becoming more an art than a science. Another thing to remember regarding presidential polls is that polls this far away from the election are close to useless in predicting the actual winner. And in this particular case, there's a huge factor that distorts the polls: celebrity. Red State's Leon Wolf stated the obvious. By the time he entered the race, almost no one of voting age in America did not know who Donald Trump was. He's the only GOP candidate who cannot say getting more media exposure will help him in the polls. Mr. Wolf points out that as other Republican candidates have been introduced to the public and gotten more exposure, many of them have caught up in head-to-head matchups with the likely Democrat nominee, Hillary Clinton. Trump has lost some ground in that regard. It's 3 months until the first state votes. An eternity in politics. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Time for a few more minutes. Penna Dexter, Jeremy Dice. And Jeremy, let's talk a little bit more about this issue of how microaggressions and this politically correct culture and others are affecting some of your religious liberty cases.
Well, what happens is that because we have emptied the terms of any kind of meaning and tried to insert new ones, what we're seeing now is, especially in the employment context, where we're having these policies that require diversity based upon race, religion, age, sex, gender, sexual orientation in some cases. You'll see HR offices skipping right over the word religion in that sentence and punishing individuals for when they speak out about it. And because they've got to protect any microaggressions or even what they will call actual aggressions. In some cases, they will even label them as hate speech when you voice one's religious opinion in the workplace. They will simply work against that. Now, they completely miss the irony of all this, in that there are two categories at play in this whole thing. One is religion and one is sexual orientation or gender or whatever it might be. And the written rule right now, or the unspoken rule right now, is that you always protect the sexual orientation side. You always deny the religious liberty side of it all. And so if you're an employee right now, I'm going to tell you, you have rights to be able to engage your religion at work, but I want to let you know that it's a dangerous time to be an employee right now. Because if you dare raise your religious opinions at work, and I would encourage you not to be afraid of that, and to go ahead and do that, but if and when you do that, you put yourself at risk for your job performance reviews to be evaluated negatively. You raise the risk of being terminated from your position. We represent a gentleman who named Thomas Banks. He worked for a contractor for Ford up in Michigan, and happened to they sent out this story on their website. They asked for feedback on it all. He gave them the feedback. The story was about the employee resource group that advocated for LGBT community on campus there, and he voiced his religious opinion against that and found himself terminated from Ford because of it all. And it's just remarkable to kind of see the machinations that they have gone through to say he was wrong and they were right, and he was aggressive, microly and otherwise, towards the other people. We've got to protect these. But wait a minute, your own policy says that you want a diverse workforce, which means there's got to be something more than just monolithic opinion and diversity of thought. You can have one opinion, and that's theirs. Mm-hmm. That's not diversity. That's not even university. It is just monolithic opinion. And then number two, even if that is the case, don't you still give at least homage to some degree that there is diversity found in religion? And today, that they would say that we are the equivalent, that religious beliefs are the equivalent of the Taliban today, and that they've got to be put down. That's an unfair and an unkind perspective to have and position to share. But that's where we're going right now. If we don't nip this idea of these coddled co-eds in their misguided thinking here, these microaggressions turn into real life and death situations. They
do. They change everything, I think, on a campus or in a workplace, and really,
or on the battlefield, for that matter, as we see overseas.
Absolutely. And, really what it is, in a sense, there's this power component where this certain group, whether it's racial, whether it's sexual orientation group, has seen themselves as second-class citizens in some way. So they're going to turn it around, and they're going to make themselves the boss. And they are gaining so much power because of the quote-unquote adults in their lives, whether it be on the campus, whether it be in their home and the parents, or in the public education system, allowing this. There's another component is laziness, intellectual laziness. Mm-hmm. We have not taught the basics of argument and rhetoric to students, and so when they get to college, the only way they know how to, I guess, make their voice heard is to just get out there and demonstrate or complain, rather than have a good argument, a good old argument. And so, it's too bad. It's really too bad. And I think they've intimidated university officials to such a degree. I mean, I just think it's very sad that some of these officials are resigning. I wish that they would stick it out.
Let's, for just a minute, talk about some resources, and that's at Liberty Institute. Right now there are probably some people saying, can I do this in my workplace? Can my child do this in the school? And we have, of course, if people click on your picture there, we'll take them to Liberty Institute. But talk about some of those resources that might be available to some of the individuals listening right now and are wondering if they're the next case that you're going to have to represent.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you. LibertyInstitute.org will get you all the information you need. But there's also a website that we've created, beyondpointofview.net. You can get all that information through there as well. But we've got kits available for you, whether you are in the workforce, in the schools, or in the military. They're little, they fit inside the pocket of your suit coat. So whatever size that is, they're kits that you can order at religiouslibertykits.com. And they're really good, handy tools to have to stick in your briefcase, to put in your pocket, put it in your Trapper Keeper, or whatever kids are using these days at school. I used a Trapper Keeper when I was a kid, or at least the cool kids did, and I wasn't that cool, so I guess I didn't have one. But you can have these things here to know what your rights are.
Very good.
And then to know how to contact us and when to contact us when those rights are violated.
So again, some of those kits would be some great resources, and you picked up on where I wanted to take people, so that's pretty good.
And they're stocking stuffer size, I might add.
There we go. He's a really smart guy. We're just about out of time, Penna, but your commentary, which people could have heard if they were listening online, and I'm finding more and more people do listen to this program online. We play it at the quarter to the top of the hour, both hours. We also have it on our website, and then we send it out to all of our people on Saturday, but it's on the political polls. And just before we run out of time, you are really warning us to have a level of discernment. When we see these polls, they aren't necessarily accurate because either people don't always give the right answer, or because of the way it's skewed in terms of the internet and cell phones, there's an issue. So talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, well, think about yourself. Do you answer the phone at home? If you have a landline at home, do you even answer it? And so there's just fewer and fewer people available to be polled on landlines. So sometimes people can be polled on cell phones, but it's not done that often. It's more expensive to do it. And so you're just getting a different kind of a group that's being polled. There are a lot of polls on the internet, but again, you're volunteering in a sense. So you may have some skin in the game when you answer these polls. So, we're just wondering how accurate polls are. And as a matter of fact, in my commentary, I mentioned that the polling one of the polling experts at the American Enterprise Institute has said we're on the edge of the end of presidential polling. It's just not accurate. We shouldn't be relying on it. I don't know if that's the case, but there's one phenomenon that's taking place right now in our presidential race on the GOP side, and that's the idea of celebrity. The campaigns serve to let people get to know the candidates. Well, there's one candidate out there that didn't need that. They didn't need the media or anybody else to help people get to know them, and that's Donald Trump. Everybody already knew who he was at the beginning of this. And so he really doesn't stand to benefit from the media. And so in a sense, that made the polls a little bit inaccurate because people will vote in polls for people they know.
Right.
Well, as this thing moves along and people are beginning to get to know the Ted Cruzes and the Marco Rubios and the Ben Carsons of the world, you're seeing them rise, and you're seeing many of them are now beating in a matchup, they're beating Hillary Clinton. So take the polls, don't completely discount them, but take them with a grain of salt as you go forward. And, try to, as we have just advocated speaking truth and arguing on college campuses, make your arguments for your candidates. This is the time to do it.
Well, again, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. You can hit that button that says read now. And some of you might even want to put it on your Facebook page. There's a place where you can put it on your Twitter feed or your Facebook page. And I would encourage you to do so. And, again, outstanding job. Penna, thank you for writing that. And thank you both for joining the program today. We are out of time before we're out of topics. We know that, and that usually takes place. So, again, if you'd like to know a little bit more about some of the issues that we've talked about today, we've posted a couple of articles as well as commentaries. We have our video. And if you want to take action, we still have that available so that you can contact your two senators about this issue of ISIS terrorists posing as Syrian refugees. So we have that at our website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day, and we will see you back here on Monday.
This time of year, it seems everyone's looking for a better, more affordable healthcare solution. But with costs rising and options limited, where do you turn? If you're a Christian, you turn to Medishare. It's not insurance. It's over 154,000 believers who share each other's medical bills. It's about half the cost of healthcare insurance programs. And it's fully acceptable under the law. Best of all, Medishare is based on the timeless principles found in God's Word. You never pay for things that go against your beliefs. Medishare is healthcare that fits your family and your faith.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your healthcare. For your free information guide, call 844-45-BIBLE. Not available in Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical healthcare. Call 844-45-BIBLE. That's 844-45-BIBLE.
A big thank you to members of Truth Team 360. You make this program possible. Not a member yet? Join today at pointofview.net. Click on Donate Now and become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily, and love you guys, and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligence,